Like a few others featured in this year's coverage, To Serve Man is absolutely one of the most famous episodes of this show. Its dark ending twist is probably what people remember most about it, but this installment is more than just that story point. It's possibly the most cinematic episode the Twilight Zone ever made, using stock footage, shots from other films, and a larger cast than usual to fill out a massive scale story that really stands on its own. Aliens called Canimites arrive on Earth with the intent of helping humanity. They have ways of generating cheap energy and ending hunger and war that humans are at first wary of, but eventually accept. Upon their first meeting, one of the aliens leave a book at the United Nations which ends up in the hands of Michael Chambers, a US government cryptographer. Together with his team, he attempts to decipher the text, but the only words able to be translated are in the title, To Serve Man. Months go by, and the Canimites have established embassies in virtually every country in the world. They've succeeded in helping mankind eradicate war, and in turn, dismantle militaries worldwide. As more of the alien race arrive on Earth, more humans board their spaceships to visit the Canimites' home planet. With peace seemingly achieved, Chambers and his team nearly give up on decoding the book, and join the latest round of humans about to tour the Canimites' place of origin. TV Guide, Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, they've all mentioned To Serve Man in high regard when counting down the best episodes of The Twilight Zone or just TV in general. Plenty of movies and other shows have parodied or homaged this installment in the decades since its debut. We also saw the return of the Canimites in the recent Jordan Peele version of the show. That episode was titled You Might Also Like. As with other favorites such as Time Enough at Last, It's a Good Life, or Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, To Serve Man has become part of pop culture almost on the same level as The Twilight Zone itself. And again, it's all about the twist. But let's not forget the other elements to this one that made it a classic. The episode was written by Rod Serling, but based on a short story by Damon Knight. There are some differences between the two, including the look of the aliens and a few plot points regarding the To Serve Man book. In the story, it's called How to Serve Man, and was stolen by one of the characters after he was able to partially learn the Canimites' language. In the episode, the book is just left in the UN unattended, and Chambers' cryptography team tries to decode it without any real knowledge of the Canimites' dialect. Of course, that's impossible without some degree of familiarity with the aliens' written language, but it's a small leap in logic that I don't think is that important to one's enjoyment of the show. How the story is reframed as an episode of television overall is in fact one of the best parts about it. We actually start off with a narration that's not Rod's. After a short scene showing Mr. Chambers being held prisoner in a high-tech sort of cell, he begins to fill us in on how he got there. We flash back to several months earlier when the Canimites first landed with their message of peace and prosperity. This established a bigger story with a truncated but effective first act. Everything just feels larger, grander in this episode. In terms of structure, it has more in common with a 50s sci-fi movie than a standard Twilight Zone episode. This is aided by the use of stock footage across the runtime. There are shots from the day the Earth stood still, Earth versus the flying saucers, and stock imagery of the United Nations peppered in here to maximum effect. Even the spaceship that's being boarded by the humans is borrowed from Forbidden Planet. Bet you never would have guessed that. The cast is expanded with plenty of smaller parts and extras coming on board to fill up a few scenes. Lloyd Bachner, Susan Cummings, and a handful of other actors all do well with the main human parts. But Richard Kiel is by far the most memorable, playing all the Canimate characters. The aliens speak mentally, so Kiel never had to utter a word, but his massive presence was more than enough to make an impression. Joseph Luskin, who appeared as a genie in The Man in the Bottle, was the voice of the Canimates, and they couldn't have gotten anyone better.
Although we know your language, our own methods of communication are mental rather than verbal. There is nothing ulterior in our motives, nothing at all.
One of the aspects that made the Canimates creepy was Kiel's blank, open-jawed expression whenever the characters spoke. However, he's even creepier when he smiles. It was the perfect restrained performance. The less emotion he showed, the better it was when any movement crossed his face. Richard Kiel had a long, significant career, notably as Jaws in a few James Bond movies, Mr. Larson in Happy Gilmore, and a ton of other roles.
Hi, I'm Sunny Anderson. I have a TV show, I have a cookbook, and I also...
The Canamit's signature look was ideal for the time period and became indelible to TZ fans. William Tuttle and his makeup department hit it out of the park with the enlarged cranium and costuming. Over the years, they've made official figurines of this character design, along with replicas of the To Serve Man book, yet another example of how well this episode is remembered. Richard L. Baer returned to direct for the first time this season. He would say years later that this was his second favorite episode to work on. The first, Season 1's Third from the Sun. I can understand that. It's another spectacular installment that's not talked about as much as this one. To Serve Man is expertly crafted, and a lot of that credit has to go to Baer. The story structure and performances were fantastic, and under his direction, the visuals captured were just as important. I love the introduction of the Canimets. One of their people walk into the UN, and we just see his shadow towering over everyone. This leads to only revealing the back of his head before we wipe to Rod's narrator spot. It was an exceptional tease to keep us hooked prior to the first commercial break. Without further ado, let's get down to the biggest reason why everyone loves this episode. As Chambers boards the spaceship, his colleague Patty arrives with an urgent message.
To Serve Man, it's a cookbook!
Michael is forced onto the ship, and we cut to some time later. Chambers is being held in a room, constantly being told to eat by the attending Canimets. They don't want him to lose any weight, after all.
Sooner or later, will all of us be on the menu? All of us.
This is still so much fun all these years later. The out-of-nowhere reveal, the sort of cheesy delivery and reaction, yet it takes itself seriously enough to register as a dark turn. It's the tone that made the Twilight Zone so unique. I'd say this and Time Enough at Last are about tied for the most famous twists in the series. This was definitely bigger in terms of the story, while the glasses of Henry Bemis shattering is more of a heartbreaking character moment. Odds are you knew about this twist without having to watch the episode. It's just out there. Those words, "it's a cookbook," are synonymous with the show in general. But even if you know the ending, To Serve Man is maybe the most impressive episode of the show. It really does feel like a movie. Pacing, scope, script, and all. This goes beyond a recommendation. You should see it if you never have. Turn it on, sit back, and let Mr. Serling and Company serve you what's considered a rare delicacy in the Twilight Zone.
How about you? You still on Earth or on the ship with me?